Ryan Brown. Today we're talking about another crime here in Georgia, and the discussion for this one is armed robbery. This is considered one of the 7 deadly crimes in Georgia, and you'll see why. It's because it carries some of the most significant punishments of any crimes in the state, and there are serious parole implications if someone's convicted of a 7 deadly crime. First, let's talk about these words in the blue. This is what a prosecutor must prove in order to convict, beyond a reasonable doubt, in order to convict someone of armed robbery. The first thing they must prove is that the defendant or the suspect took someone's property, right? That they did so with the intention of stealing it, so they are trying to, take it, appropriate it for themselves, and that in doing so they used a weapon, a firearm, a knife, a gun, or something that represents a gun, BB gun, things like that can be used, or even a fake gun could likely be used as the basis if the victim or the person that was robbed had the impression that there was a firearm being used. So it's not a complicated crime in the sense of, there are classic examples of armed robbery, right? Somebody pulls a gun on somebody and says, "Give me your money," right? Armed robbery, that happened, okay? So it's not a complicated thing, but it is very serious. And that's what's going to bring us to the sentencing here. So the Georgia law provides that death can be imposed for an armed robbery conviction. Now, thankfully, back in the 70s, that was declared unconstitutional, and that is not something that happens any longer. However, there are other very serious sentencing implications. For instance, someone could be sentenced to life if they are convicted of armed robbery. If they receive a life sentence, they would be eligible for parole consideration after 30 years. That doesn't mean they would parole out. It just means that after 3 decades in prison, they could have a parole hearing, at which point the parole board could say no, or we'll see you in 7 years or something like that. Very serious. The standard range, 10 to 20, is what we see most often. The important thing to note about this is any sentence between 10 and 20 cannot be paroled, okay? The minimum is 10. That sentence can't be served on probation or suspended or anything like that. If you're convicted of armed robbery, the very least amount of time you can do in prison is 10 years. No parole, no early release, none of that. If you get convicted of armed robbery, the absolute least amount of time you can do in prison is 1 decade, 10 years. Okay? Now, you could get a 20 do 10 or a 15 do 10 where there is a probationary period, but that 10 is going to be served in prison if you're convicted. There's an interesting enhancement that raises the minimum sentence from 10 to 15 years if you rob a pharmacy. So there's special laws here in Georgia for armed robbery of a pharmacy. I think it is the legislature's intention that it will help with drug trade and things of that nature and to protect pharmacists. But again, raises the minimum to 15, maximum 20. But the big takeaway here is this 10 to 20 range and the lack of being parole eligible. We talked at the very beginning of the video about it being a 7 deadly crime, and the real implication of that is that there is no parole for this. There are ways to get armed robbery reduced to a robbery charge, which is parole eligible, and that's a big deal. But a conviction for armed robbery, no parole. If you get a 15-year sentence, that's what you have to do. So as always, you can find us at jryanbrownlaw.com. Our office hub is in Coweta County. However, we serve clients throughout the entire state of Georgia. Our phone number is 470-635-1725. Again, 470-635-1725. You can call us, or as always, to make it easy for you, text us at that number any time of day, and we'll be right back with you.